Welcome back to another episode of Sabres Chat with your host, Luka. I am Luka, of course, presented by Built in Buffalo. Good to be back. Sorry about missing it last week. Just things were coming up and whatnot. And unfortunately, just wasn't able to kind of sit down at my normal time and just record a quick episode. It seems like the summertime life is really getting to myself at times. It is what it is, things come first and whatnot, but glad to be back and everything like that. This won't be too long of an episode, but it kind of came to mind when missing last week and kind of just has been scrambling around my mind now that the wave of free agency is, of course, far and over. A month ago, no, sorry, geez, a month ago. It feels like a month ago. It's only been 2+ weeks, but free agency has kind of calmed down, of course. Not really been a lot of stuff with trades. You see a sprinkled signing here or there around the league. There's been a trade or two, kind of minor league stuff, nothing of note and whatnot. And you get the feeling now where the topic of tonight's episode comes to mind, where it's about the Sabres, of course, in that sense. And is the roster the way that it is good enough to kind of get over the edge and to make the playoffs? And I found myself thinking about that for a little bit, and I wanted to make it this week's episode because it's a simple thing to think about right now. We are, I believe it's about a month and a half away from camp and everything like that. Preseason, I know for sure, is mid to late September. Got those tickets in my seasons recently here. I see that. So that's exciting and whatnot. But we're at that point where I wouldn't necessarily expect to see any moves, but there's still plenty of time to have it. So I want to kind of think about looking at the season, looking at the schedule, stuff like that. I'm not going to get into games specifically or anything tonight. That might be something for a future episode. But I wanted to kind of feel it out and kind of give pros and cons or reasons why and why not potentially that this roster, if it is capable to make the playoffs, because they just came up so short last year. And you have a couple good additions, of course, that we discussed last time, mainly on the defensive side of things. And yet it's still a young core that now is uh, one more season into their young careers where they had those battle hardened ways of kind of having the unfortunate finish of not making it and being so close to making it, where hopefully that can drive them further. So to really get into it here, I kind of want to start with the positive and everything like that. And kind of, it's not a simple question to answer, but it really seems like it should be good enough, just kind of lame's terms. And the reasons that I feel like it should be good enough, it kind of goes back to what I just said there. This roster was 1 point short. And I'm not going to talk about that going into next year. That's probably going to be the only time I even bring it up. I hate when I hear it, to be quite honest, from other individuals. Yes, they missed it by 1 point, but realistically, there were moments, and I'm documented and kind of already giving up before they even got to those last weeks or two of the season, where it just seemed like it was over, and yet somehow the results were working out in a way around them that kind of kept them in it much later than it really seemed like they should have. There was that Dallas game, that 10-goal blowout loss, uh, that it really seemed like that was the final nail in the coffin, and yet it wasn't, as we seem to have learned later on. So um, they did miss it by 1 point last season. They were very, very close, and obviously the entire key core of this team is returning from that. And therefore, you would like to think that maybe that overtime loss that they gave up a 2-goal lead going into the third won't happen next season because they'll be more focused. The Florida game, maybe they'll be able to win it instead of lose it, even with just allowing an early third period goal and just kind of grinding it out to that 2-1 loss. Maybe they can actually find the goals within that they need to get that one after going down 2-1 early in the third, stuff like that. And then on top of that young core, as I had mentioned before, they bring in a Clifton and a Johnson, two experienced defensemen that should help hopefully bolster that unit, and something that was definitely a clear weakness of the team, and just bring both experience in the locker room, but then also on the ice with every shift. That it's easy to understand when you got your fan goggles on, that that alone should be something that really boosts your confidence, and it should. Like, I'm not there's nothing tonight, even when I get into possibly some of the negatives, that should kind of take away from your optimism. At this point last season, we were just hoping for an exciting season, one that would be entertaining through the end of it, and hopefully they could be somewhat in meaningful games come late February, March, maybe push April, maybe. And it turns out they went all the way until finally the last couple games didn't matter, and that's more than we could have asked for. So now we're in a situation where it's like, yes, playoffs are the expectation and hope, but overall, you should look at this roster and see what they were last season. They had that one big skid early on last season. If they can at least be a little bit more consistent there and stuff, so on and so forth, maybe it's a totally different story even last season. And now we're not even trying to debate if they can break this kind of drought because the drought has already been broken. It's little tiny details like that that I really feel like this unit can build on, grow from. And because they had just missed out so close, that maybe they can actually turn it around and figure it out. Another good reason I brought up is even in the limited time that we saw him, of course, Levi did provide that breath of fresh air between the pipes in net. There was clearly something different about Levi, and it's what makes it so exciting, of course, with Levi going forward, where, even at UPL's heights, we'll call it, he was still allowing 3 goals a game. I remember when he won Rookie of the Week, I believe it was, um, the award. He had 3 great games, and like the games themselves were great, but it was, it was a 9.92 something save percentage. Maybe he broke 9.3. Can't remember. It was all the way back in January. But he had 3 outstanding games, but the goals against average was 3 because he allowed 3 goals in all 3 games. And it was just kind of that situation with UPL where it's, the goals are coming. As a betting individual, it was UPL in net. I know there's most likely 3 against. I just believe that, even as the Sabres were hot, they were good to score 4. So over 6.5 felt very good. So, doing a Sabres puck line plus 1.5 and then over 6.5 was a very, very good bet on UPL nights. Because even if the Sabres lost, they seem to have, made sure they lost by only 1 goal or so on and so forth. So when it switched over to Levi at the end of last season, when we watched those games, everyone knows, of course, it really seemed like something different was in net. There was a little bit more juice. The team in front of him was playing a little bit better. I don't kind of buy into people saying that the defensive side of stuff was any better at all. I really don't think that was the case. I just think Levi was just a little bit quicker in net to kind of bail out guys at times. And even then, by the way, Levi just got lucky. There's the one against the Rangers where it's kind of an open net one timer. And unfortunately for whoever the Ranger player was, he didn't get good wood on it. It kind of slid back across to where Levi was, and he makes the save. Um, it's better to be lucky than good, of course, but even putting those aside, there was just clearly something different. And Levi wasn't guaranteed 3 goals a night or anything like that. There was a stretch where he didn't allow more than 2 goals for the first 3 or 4 starts of his young career. So there's something different with Levi that makes it exciting, and the promise and hope of potentially something way more steady in net is there now for the Sabres, which it seems like it's the first time in so long that the Sabres have had something like that at the goaltending position going into a season. I mean, it was a lot of years of Craig Anderson or Carter Hutton or, UPL, of course, was with us last year for the first time. But then, you have all these other guys that are this mosh posh of goaltending. And it's just like none of this is steady or makes you feel comfortable about what's at that position going into the season. Levi at least has this promise and this hope that maybe we do have something finally that we can kind of lean on a little bit with where the current roster is. And then you have UPL who can still put in a good game and performance himself. He's young, he's hungry. I don't think UPL is going to lean kind of just like hand over the net all willing. But at this point, I think it is Levi's net at this moment in time. And then UPL is just going to have to fight to get it back if Levi were to say start a little bit rough or something like that were to happen. So a lot of good reasons on why this roster, as it currently is good enough to go. I mean, they were a top 5 scoring offense the entire season. You have the likes of Dahlin, who really stepped up, of course, and you expect him to even elevate somewhat further from last season because he's still young and still learning and growing as a man, but then just as a hockey player, more importantly. Well, man is actually probably more importantly, but regardless, in hockey terms, he's still growing as a hockey player. And then you, of course, have the dynamic top line of Skinner, Thompson, and Tuck coming back. Thompson and Tuck are still on the youngerish side. Skinner is in his young 30s as the vet on that line, but it seems like he's still got the energy to play and everything like that. It's a beautiful top line and whatnot. So there's a lot of promising things that with that addition of a couple defensemen, it seems like the roster where it currently is definitely has the potential to finally break that drought for sure. But, and this is where the negative part of this episode starts, but if you were to think that, if you are someone out there, let's go this way. If you are someone out there that thinks it's a for sure thing, this roster clearly has gotten better and therefore they absolutely should make the playoffs. This is where I kind of like put the caution on. This is where I would tell you to kind of like pump the brakes a little bit. You're going 60 and a 35. Let's make sure we're no more than 10 over on the speed limit here. It's exciting. It's exciting times to be a Sabres fan. The season cannot come soon enough. But this is where I give a little caution. And it's, we're talking about, like, let's go into my first point here that I have written down. I just mentioned and talked about Levi. We're talking about Levi here. We're talking about UPL. It seems like day one, your starter is going to be Levi. UPL will be the backup. Eric Comrie is still on the roster. I don't know if he'll be on game day rosters all that much, but we'll see what they do with him. Ultimately, it seems like Levi, then UPL. Those two combined going into this year have a total of 53 games started in the National Hockey League. And obviously, a vast majority of those go to UPL. Only 7 starts for Devin Levi. UPL is the only of the two, of course, as well, to have one full season of top tier hockey and being on the roster for an entire season between the two. And you are hoping that that very young and inexperienced goaltending unit can lead or at least bring this, what is potentially a contending team, over the top and get it done. You would feel a lot more comfortable, let's say, with a much more proven starting goaltender between the pipes than either of those in an isolated world. I'm not talking about like you move Devin Levi just for any, proven starting NHL goaltender. But what I'm just saying is, if you were to, this is fantasy hockey, who would you rather have, Devin Levi or, I mean, I'll throw out a hot name. I'm not saying it again, but Connor Hellebuck or whatever. You would go with Connor Hellebuck. It'd be pretty ridiculous not to. And it's just, there's a lot of inexperience in that. And it's all kind of projection. It's all, we're assuming and hoping that Devin Levi can step up and be that number one goaltender that we've so craved for so long and stuff like that. And then UPL can be a very serviceable backup for us for now. And, we'll move forward with that. And hopefully it works out that way. It's just, that's a projection. It's not, and there's nothing known. You're going off of 7 games of a young guy's career, and he's never been in the NHL with Levi. He's never kind of gone through the grind of a season. And I'm not someone that has played, of course, at that level or anywhere near at that level. But you hear from players that have talk about that grind and talk about the day to day and all of that kind of stuff. And there's a reason you just don't see a lot of guys just immediately jump into the big league, the top level of a sport, and just kind of go off. It's just not a common thing. And there's a reason for it. And, I hope Levi is just kind of an anomaly. I hope it can work out, but we'll have to see. It's all projection. So I would like to, however it can be done, I would love to see a little bit of a more steady kind of presence in net in an optimal world. But it is what it is, what it seems like at this point, unless we see otherwise. There's a question mark there, we'll call it. But the bigger point I kind of wanted to get at with this is other teams around the Sabres. So the Senators and Detroit are 2 that I've kind of isolated here. There's another one that I won't spoil for now that I feel like is definitely forgotten about, but is someone to kind of keep your one eye on. It's not like they're not getting better themselves, right? Those teams are right around with the Sabres And they themselves also understood they needed to get better to make the playoffs. And they are desperate to get back to the playoffs themselves. And they also made moves or are getting additions, more in the sense of Ottawa, back to the lineup that should help kind of bolster their hopes to getting back to the playoffs. So it's like I kind of want to go through that real quick because some people just don't look around the league. They want to look at their team, and that's great. Like, you're a Sabres fan, you want to be invested in the Sabres. It's not like you can be invested in everything. I'm with you on that 100%. It's not like other teams just stand pat. I mean, other teams, of course, get better on paper. It's all paper talk right now. We're not playing games, so but on paper, other teams get better. I'm going to go into Detroit right now, first and foremost. And it's like, look, Detroit had a massive overhaul. Massive. Um, they already had a guy like Dylan Larkin, of course, their captain, a very, very good player in this league already. And then they go out and finally get him kind of an elite goal scorer, a proven goal scorer, an individual with 2 40-goal seasons in this league, where he did have an unbelievable playmaker with him. I'm not calling Dylan Larkin Patrick Kane, of course, but he had an unbelievable playmaker with him, and that's Alex DeBrincat. And DeBrincat is something that Dylan Larkin has never had in his career. He's never had an absolute elite goal scoring machine on his wing. So now you're giving an already elite talent that is, or a very, very, very good. I don't necessarily buy into Dylan Larkin being elite. He's a very, very, very good player. I just don't label him as elite, but you're giving that very, very, very good player now an elite goal scorer in Alex DeBrincat. And then they also kind of just brought in another piece to bolster their centers real quick with JT Compher. The contract is interesting. I felt it was a little bit much for a guy like JT Compher, kind of a third line center. I think they have him, some places out there have him penciled in as a second line center at this moment in time. I would probably say Andrew Kopp is still their second line center personally, and then JT Compher is a third line center. But that's a hell of a lot better than what Detroit has had in the past down that spine of the forwards. So that's really nice. And then they bolstered their defense themselves, bringing in a guy like Gosh Despair, who had a nice bounce back season last year, and Justin Hall, who's a solid player himself. So Detroit kind of really went around all the different edges and everything like that, and just made they got better everywhere. Like I don't know how else to say it. They went out, they attacked everything they possibly could, and I just looked it up right now because I didn't write it down, but I was like, I'm pretty sure they even brought out a goaltender themselves, and they brought in Alex Lyon, who was a very key guy for Florida down the stretch to get them into the playoffs. So you have Alex Lyon. You still have Ville Husso, who was all right for them last season. He wasn't the worst thing in the world. He wasn't anything special either, but they have top to bottom an overhaul of the roster that clearly on paper looks better. And they were right there with the Sabres. Another team that was right there around the Sabres that kind of got additions in different ways was Ottawa. So Ottawa naturally traded DeBrincat to Detroit, but in return for DeBrincat, who it didn't work out in Ottawa last season. I don't know how much of DeBrincat kind of, it seems like afterwards saying he wasn't going to sign an extension with them and he didn't see a future there. I don't know how much or how soon that was into the season that he kind of had this realization he didn't have a future there. But I'm not going to speculate on that, but in return for DeBrincat, they go and get a very nice player in Kubalik to bring in there. But the biggest piece that Ottawa gets back is Josh Norris, who going into last season would have been their top center. Tim Stützle is their top center now. But when Josh Norris is your second center and you have Stützle and then Josh Norris, you are a very good team in your top six with your centers, especially. Like Josh Norris, who had a shoulder injury all last season. I believe it occurred right at the beginning of the season in October. I believe he tried to come back in January. It didn't work out. He got season-ending injury. He essentially didn't play all of last season. That shoulder injury just took him out completely. You get him back, hopefully at full health. You get Kubalik, who's a really nice addition. And, he's not the elite goal scoring type of DeBrincat, but if he wants to actually play for the team, unlike potentially the guy who he just came in for, you pair him up with Stützle, or if he's on the second line with Josh Norris, wherever he ends up fitting, it's a very, very good team already. It was a team that a lot of individuals thought should have been a playoff team last year at full health. It didn't work out for them. Again, they're getting better. And honestly, the biggest thing with this team to remember is Josh Norris is coming back. Hopefully, he's fully healthy if you're an Ottawa Senators fan, and you just get this massive boost. Centers are very important, of course, and you get a guy at the skill set and talent of him coming back. Very, very good for Ottawa. They get better with that. They also made a couple other moves that, it definitely, depth wise and things like that should sure up a couple things and whatnot. Just nothing super crazy. Cam Talbot in net, I believe they brought in just as a veteran goaltender. Definitely not, it's not like he's 1 foot to retirement. It doesn't seem like at this point. He's not anything outstanding either, but he can be a solid veteran guy for them in net with, I can't think of the Swedish guy's name, unfortunately, at this point in time. I should have wrote that down. I do apologize, but Ottawa got better. The last team, though, is the one I'm excited about. And I'm going to take a drink of water real quick here, but the last team I didn't want to tease because it's absolutely a team I think a lot of general fans out there kind of overlook a little bit when it comes to the teams that are getting better around this time of season. And it's shocking because they did a lot. This team clearly had an objective of they don't want to be what they were last season, because well um last season was a disaster for them. And the first point I'll make with this team, it's clearly the first big step of why, but Columbus and the Columbus Blue Jackets, they are a team that I get sounds crazy to say got a hell of a lot better. But when you lay it out with a couple moves and a couple of situations that they got coming, within the team that they already had with a couple pieces like Johnny Hockey and Patrick Laine, who are proven goal scorers in this league, they are definitely a team that I would be far from shocked taking a massive step forward and getting back into the mix and being very competitive. I'm not calling them a playoff team. It's just they're no walk in the park. And let me remind everyone, Columbus beat the Sabres multiple times last season, and they were awful at that point. They came into Buffalo at one point when Buffalo was absolutely needing to win games, as they were very much in the thick of it. And Buffalo put up a stinker against the Columbus Blue Jackets on, I believe, a Tuesday night. I don't know why I'm thinking of the night, but I'm pretty sure it was like a Tuesday night. Regardless, then this is the situation with Columbus. They were without Zach Werenski for all of last season. Zach Werenski is clearly their number one guy on the blue line. He is potentially even the face of the franchise, or one of the faces of the franchise. Zach Werenski is a beast. He is a bona fide number one in this league for any team. He was out all last season. He should hopefully for them come back full health this season. You already get that. They then go out and get Severson from New Jersey and add him to the blue line with Werenski, and then also go and trade for Provorov from Philadelphia to then have on the second pair to pair up with Peak. That top four is a top four worthy of a majority of hockey teams. That is the top four defensive line for the Columbus Blue Jackets. A very, very, very good looking top four on paper at full health. For the game of hockey, I really hope Werenski comes back. He's a very exciting player to watch. If he's back, Provorov's fine, Severson's fine, and you got Peak in there to put with Provorov on that second line. Wow. And very, very good. They then had Fantilli fall to their lap at 3 in the draft. He is going to be on the roster from day one. He's going to be their second line center, I would assume, under Boone Jenner, who will just be slotted in the top line to start the season between Gaudreau and Laine. That is a very interesting top six. Fantilli, of course, adds a very dynamic center to that lineup finally. That I do think is one thing that they kind of miss a little bit. Boone Jenner, very, very, very good hockey player. I wouldn't necessarily define him as dynamic, of course. And they really haven't had a guy like that since Pierre-Luc Dubois, who didn't want to be there as a dynamic center. So You add Fantilli now to that lineup. That top six looks very juicy. The power play looks incredible with him, Johnny Hockey, Patrick Laine, Zach Werenski, of course, I named things like that. You have a lot of different things now with the Columbus Blue Jackets where it's like they absolutely shouldn't be a cellar dweller come next season. They should be a very competitive team. They should be able to compete with anyone next season. Um, they are kind of, to me, the prime example of other teams also got a hell of a lot better, right? And you can get a lot better through multiple different things. You can get better through free agency. You can get better through trades, but you can also just get way better, in Columbus and Ottawa's sake, like I mentioned, when you have a very key individual go down with a season-long injury right at the beginning, and now you're kind of stuck without that massive hole that you need to find production for, and it's just impossible. It's impossible to find guys to match a production of a true number one center or a true number one defenseman. Like, you can't replicate that. Unfortunately, it will cause a massive issue with the team and with results and for the entire season, and it's just too hard to overcome. So other teams get better too. And then the final little tidbit I want to kind of bring up as well is this team just really feels a little bit still with where it's at, where if they suffer an unfortunate injury to another top six forward, that they will fall off a cliff when it comes to depth scoring. And they already kind of have depth scoring, but like it's already on the precipice a little bit, because you had a guy like Olofsson last year on the third line, and I'm not saying the third line was lighting lamps a lot last season. Olofsson did his part with over 20 goals, with a number of empty netters, we'll call it, and a couple power plays in there, where it's not exactly like all those goals were coming from the third line itself on 5-on-5 play. But the point is, you already have a guy like Jack Quinn go down. He's going to be out for, the start of the season with that Achilles injury he suffered, unfortunately. And Olofsson now is that guy that you kind of pencil in that top six to be on the wing with Cousins and Peterka. And that totally makes sense. Olofsson is a proven goal scorer in this league. He has proven that he can play top 6 minutes and do it at a somewhat high level at times. It's not that the effort is necessarily there. It's just at least the production comes with it. He can be that guy. He's still a little bit of a specialist and whatnot, but he has at least a scoring presence to him and an ability that he should be able to produce, especially if you have more engines types like Dylan Cousins and Peterka with him out there. I apologize. That it should work. But when you are now bringing up Olofsson and you have that top line that I brought up earlier in Skinner, Thompson, and Tuck, you're now left with kind of, you're most likely going to have whoever it is that you're bringing up from the AHL on the third line with Middlestat and potentially Greenway. Greenway could be on the fourth line. You have Gergensons, you have Okposo, you have Peyton Krebs. You have that kind of mosh posh down there in the third and fourth lines. There is some talent there. Middlestat is definitely a player that is capable of, kind of being a very productive player on his own. He showed, 5-on-5, an incredible talent, incredible skill set for 5-on-5 play. He can make things on his own, even if his line mates aren't able to assist him as much as you would like them to. But if you take away one more of those top six forwards, and then you do have to slide in a Middlestat up there. So, the Thompson injury, hopefully it's not Thompson again, but the Thompson injury late last season kind of showed it. Now you bring up Middlestat, and that third line essentially just becomes an extension of the fourth line, where instead of you really thinking that they're going to be able to go out there and potentially, steal a goal or two for you, let's say once every 3 games, which, I mean, they should be able to get a goal for you every other game, once every 3 games, whatever it might be. You want to be 3 lines deep. You want to be scoring wise 3 lines deep if you are a competing team. If you are a team that is looking to push for the playoffs, you need to be 9 forwards deep. Okay, we're already 1 injury short. Now, if you go 2 injuries deep, yes, they are injuries we're talking about. Hopefully these players come back and whatnot. But at the same time, it already feels like they're very thin at that point, where you have a Middlestat centering a Greenway and whoever, and it ends up making that wing spot out of the Amherst or whoever it is. Maybe there are still moves, but we're going with the kind of exercise today that it is about the current roster. So current roster would just be whoever is the next man up coming from Rochester, whether it's Kulich or whoever else. So you get another injury. It's very, very tough. You would like to just see one more sure guy there. It becomes difficult because, you could have had the luxury of moving an Olofsson and whatever in a package for then maybe a more kind of different style, but proven NHLer that is still a legitimate scorer in this league. With the Quinn injury, it makes it a little more complicated because you're just comfortable with your guy, and maybe you just Olofsson becomes a trade deadline piece at this point, and you're just going with it. So it's hard. You would just like to be a little bit deeper on that depth scoring. You'd like that third line to not feel like an extension to your fourth line where it's 45 to 55 second shifts to essentially grind it out and give those top two lines a rest. You would like that third line to still be a scoring threat out there. But if one more injury comes to that top line, it's going to be tough with where this current roster is. Middle stat slides up, and it's not like I'm looking at Greenway or Krebs or anyone for that matter. I'm not leaning on them for goals. The goals they will get are nice. It's just you look at it, Greenway hasn't hit double digit goals in a few years. Krebs, you know, if he gets, I'm gonna look it up on the fly here. I apologize that I don't have this right now because I'm just kind of like thinking about it. But overall, it's like these guys. Yeah, I was gonna say I didn't think he was quite at double digits. He had 9 goals last season. You have these individuals who are single digit goal years coming in, and you need them to kind of be 15 to 20 goal scorers in a situation if they're regular third liners. Like that's what your regular third liner should be on a contending team. I'm not saying just in general in any NHL team. I'm saying on a contending team, you would like at least one or two of those third liners to be a 15 to 20 goal scorer. They should be 50-point players. And one more injury to this top six, and it's just not the case anymore. And that's a shame. And even in the sense when Quinn comes back and he regains his spot on that top six, Olofsson slides back down. Again, Olofsson, yes, he's getting the overall goals you need, but they're a little bit different and they're a little bit more kind of handed out, manufactured a little bit, where it's a lot of specialty and empty nets and things of that nature, where realistically 5-on-5 play, he's probably a 12 to 15 goal scorer at best. And it's just, that's not good enough, unfortunately. Like that's okay. But when he's the only guy doing that, and then he's not doing the other work that you need to do to help out, say Greenway and or Middlestat, and those guys need a little bit of assistance themselves. It's not like they can do everything all the time. Mainly Middlestat, of course. You just want a little bit more. You want a little bit more. So it's a little bit of a weird kind of topic to bring up when it comes to injuries and stuff like that, because of course you never want to project those kinds of things. But it's a legitimate reason. It's a legitimate reason to kind of give a little caution on, is this roster the way it is currently good enough to make the playoffs? Because you're already suffering one, and the season hasn't even started with Quinn. So really, is there something else that can be done to this roster to potentially bolster it just a little bit more? So then it becomes almost a luxury even once Quinn does come back. Like that's the feeling that would feel great. If you have something that makes you still feel good now, but then even becomes even better and more luxurious once Quinn is back, like that would be a hell of a lot better feeling. I'm not hating on this roster overall. That was just a couple points both for and after. And it does seem like I spent a little bit more time on the negative here, but it's not even negative. I shouldn't even be saying negative. I should be saying kind of bringing caution to the conversation. Yes, this roster, I believe, should be capable of making the playoffs. They showed last season at times that they are, but consistency is massive, and they didn't quite have that for the entire stretch of the season. And now they need to show us and everyone and whatnot that they can be consistent. They won't have an 8-game slide in November. They won't kind of tail off once the games start really mattering end of March, things like that. You can't have those moments. You need to be consistent. You can't go on 3-game skids at any point in time, so on and so forth. You need to have the ability to kind of game by game just grind out results and grind out points so that you can inevitably break that barrier that is the playoffs. This roster can do it the way it is. It just seems like there's still a little bit more caution if you kind of take off the fandom blinders and really evaluate and think about, teams around the Sabres that have gotten better, but then also what the Sabres roster could look like if maybe they brought in one other thing and stuff like that. I'm not saying they will. It's not like you hear anything out there, unfortunately, or geez, I shouldn't say unfortunately. It's not like you hear anything out there though. It's just you kind of think about it. You really, if you kind of peek under the hood and you evaluate the team and evaluate the roster, see what they have. There's exciting stuff down in the AHL, of course. You got Kulich, you got Savoy's. I don't know if they're necessarily going to be guys that the organization's looking to bring up immediately. It'd be cool, it'd be fun. Kulich, of course, has a lot of hype to him, as does Savoy. They might have other plans with that lineup and whatnot, but overall, I think the lineup is okay enough. I think it's decent enough. I think another year of experience is good for them, but there's a caution to be had when thinking about the playoffs and whatnot. And it's not inevitable. I mean, I don't think anyone out there is thinking that, of course. I mean, when you have this many seasons of not making it, you're not just assuming it's going to be handed to you. But what I mean by that essentially is just it doesn't seem as sure of a thing. It doesn't seem like this isn't a video game by 1 year of experience. They're all going to guarantee to get better as well. A lot of them had career years. So can they at least kind of get 85 to 90% of the way there to the career year, if not even improve on that? It's tough to constantly have career years, of course, but you would like to hope so because they're young and promising. Dahlin, Thompson, all these guys, like you'd hope that they can step up even further. Cousins, of course. So fingers crossed that it happens. Fingers crossed and everything like that. I think this roster is fun and exciting. I have no problem with seeing the roster the way it is come opening night. It's just interesting to think about if it is actually, in fact, good enough when you look at other teams, when you look at the league as a whole. Because the other quick point I'll bring is, yes, I was negative about the teams that were close to the Sabres in the standings come last year, but also didn't make it, that then did get better themselves and have a lot of kind of interesting things to themselves. But, Tampa, is their reign over? Potentially. It looks like they already had to lose a couple more pieces, things like that. Boston had a lot of turnover and stuff. They lost Tyler Bertuzzi to the Leafs and whatnot. The Leafs look like they're primed to finally take over that top spot in the division, with Boston kind of falling off a little bit and then them bolstering with a couple big 1-year contracts to kind of like give them a little bit of a different feel and a little bit more of a legit kind of physical factor while also still having and maintaining that scoring. So it'll be an interesting season and everything like that to see how the teams above the Sabres break down, with the likes of Tampa and Boston. And then, you also have the teams around them, like we have talked about once more, Ottawa, Detroit, stuff like that. But this team can do it. Let's hope they can do it, everything like that. But let's make sure we don't buy into the hype train too much here. That's kind of the overall message and the underlying kind of message I want to get out there. So I appreciate you stopping by for another episode of Sabres Chat. I appreciate these all the time. You be sure to like this video, comment down below on all your thoughts, things like that. Reach out to me at Sabres Chat Pod. If you got any thoughts, follow along. I post stuff once in a while. I've been a little inactive right now. The summer is a little bit tough. A lot of travel, a lot of things going on. I'm a golf tournament guy. Got a lot of things going on with that. Got a golf tournament next weekend. Had one this past Sunday. So on and so forth. Also, be sure to stop by at Bill's Chat Pod if you want to chime in to myself or Josh. We run that account, of course. That's our main podcast account and whatnot. We appreciate everyone that comes by. Real quick, we do have a Madden giveaway through our Bill's Chat Pod account. I will just put it up here for anyone that's watching the video real quick. Madden's around the corner. It's very close to both myself and Josh. It's kind of where we met and kind of kindred a friendship that we have, and then inevitably have gone down this journey together because of Madden. We are very appreciative, and because of that, and with Josh Allen of the Bills, of course, being on the cover, we have the gracious ability of handing out a total of 4 codes for Madden out to anyone that does the things that we're asking for in order to enter themselves into this giveaway. So to enter, simply as the graphic shows, you need to like the tweet that's pinned at the Twitter profile at Bill's Chat Pod right at the top there. You need to retweet it. A quote retweet works as well. And then just comment on it both with the system and then tag a friend, or, say something nice about them, talk some smack, whatever you want to do there. You get a bonus entry as well if you actually follow that account or are already following. Both do count. So be sure to do that. Still got time to enter in that. The the giveaway will close on basically midnight of Friday, the 11th of August. So plenty of time still with that. Be sure to stop by and give that out. If you're a big Madden head, go for it. But once more, thank you for listening to another episode of Sabres Chat presented by Built in Buffalo. I am Luka, your host. You have a great rest of your day. Take care.